So this is a beginner's guide to diverse programming. I'm David Sin. I'm head of cinemas at the Independent Cinema Office. I think most of you I know, actually. We've had a bit of a change of plan. I'll introduce my colleagues on the panel in a minute. We've had a bit of a change of plan in that rather than us talking at you a little bit more, some of you came to the earlier presentation, probably didn't have any chance to ask questions of the speakers. So what we thought we'd do in this session is we'll just briefly introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about our programming histories, if you like. And then we'll open it out to the floor and take questions from you straight away and have a kind of more informal discussion, if that's okay. Does that sound okay? Would you prefer to see some more PowerPoint presentations?
It's never enough.
No, okay, we'll open it out as a discussion. So, where should we start?
Yeah.
If I can introduce my colleague here, Jemma Desai. Jemma, do you want to just say something about yourself? Jemma also works for the Independent Cinema Office.
Yeah, so I'm a programmer at the ICO, but I started my career actually working at the Black Culture Archives, and you had Yana talk about the cinema programme that she put together as the opening event, and the Staying Power project actually that she mentioned was a project that me with my colleagues at the Black Culture Archives about 10 years ago, maybe not that long, but almost that long ago, actually worked up at that time. So I think what's been really interesting for me is that I was actually going to start by saying that I'm right at the beginning of all of this, and that these guys have seen some cycles of these discussions already, etc. But actually coming here today, I've realised that I've seen a cycle of my own. So I'm very much, have always been interested in identity and representation in terms of programming and culture. And it's been a real education being at the ICO and working with venues across the UK, because it's made me really understand my privileged position in living in London, being born in London. But also I think what a lot of speakers have said, what Gaylene said so beautifully at the beginning, that I also have a specific perspective that is interesting as well for people that maybe haven't been around so many different people. So that's a bit about why I'm doing programming. Gaylene is whispering. I also do a screening series called I Am Dora, which is all about female identification and representation on screen. So as that's gone along, it's very much about how you feel when you watch a film. It's very much about what those girls were saying in the Girlhood video. So what happens when you see yourself on screen? And it doesn't matter that they might not look exactly like you, but they express an emotion that resonates with you. And most of the time when it resonates, it's something that you haven't felt before, and how profound that is. So I think what you said, Gaylene, about not having that, making you even more curious, is something that very much has been my experience.
Okay. And Gaylene Gould, curator and coach, who you've seen already this morning. Gaylene, do you want to talk about a bit more about your...
I'll say a bit about my curatorial background, I suppose. But I just wanted to sort of say why I prompted Jemma to talk about I Am Dora, which is an amazing space, actually, which Gemma's created. It takes place at the ICA. Is because I think one of the things that I love about curating diverse work, or whatever language we're going to use, is because I work with some of the brightest, most brilliant people. And I think what often happens if you are, which we'll talk about, but what often happens, the joy of working in this world is because there are so many people of different interests, backgrounds, persuasions, that's a constant education for me. So meeting Jemma has been a great education for me. And that's kind of why I'm interested specifically in work that is rarely seen. Because I learn loads, quite simply. So I've worked in major institutions like the BFI, major international film festivals like Toronto, Hot Docs Documentary Festival as a programmer, but I've also worked with small grassroots activist organisations like the Centre for Social Action, doing work with ex-mining villages like I spoke about, and also more independent initiatives that are working in interesting ways in odd venues, car parks, whatever. I've done all kinds of pop-up type events. But again, the interest is that plurality and multiplicity of film experience that's driven my curatorial interest.
Great, thanks. And I'm David Sin, as I mentioned before, Head of Cinemas at the ICO. I've been a programmer. I've worked in programming for about 25 years now. I started my career working as a programmer in relatively small regional film theatres in Derby. I see Adam and Devon from Derby Quad. But I've also worked at much larger institutions like the BFI. My experiences at the BFI were quite similar to Gaylene's, I think, the way that she was describing it at the beginning.
It's all right.
No, some good and some not so positive. But I particularly, I suppose, want to talk about my spell as Director of Cinema at the ICA in London, which at that time, at the end of the 90s into the early 2000s, was probably the cinema with the most diverse programme in terms of the range of film cultural traditions that the programme represented and reflected in some way. And that was because we had made a decision that actually what we were interested in at the ICA Cinema at that time was just simply new voices in cinema, sort of emerging voices and new forms of cinema. Newness and innovation was the kind of key to it. And if you take that stance, you start to break away from the other kinds of the other agendas that are at work in film distribution, especially. What I mean by that is that the cinema there was not at all dependent on the films that were released through the FDA release schedule, so films that were on general release in the UK. In fact, if films were being released through conventional commercial distribution channels, the ICA would not show those films, and instead we started showing films from other sources and trying to present an alternative kind of film body of films to that which were being released through the FDA schedule. And that kind of frees you up, I think, from a kind of commercial agenda and enables you to think kind of laterally about a much broader range of programming that you can bring in. It's difficult, it's not without risks, and it requires some resourcing and some faith from people above you, senior managers and the board of the institution. But it kind of pays off in the end in that you start to build a much broader, a much more diverse audience base, which responds to you build up a kind of trust level with your audience, your range of audiences, and they respond much more to your different forms of programming. They're much more open to the audiences become much more open to new forms of cinema and new film language. And over the course of I was there for 4 years, so it was like felt to me like a 4-year project. And over that period, I think the audience for the ICA cinemas doubled from 45,000 a year to about 90,000 a year the year I left. So it does have an impact, but you have to think of it as a long-term strategy.
I can answer that in 2 ways, really. So one is to say that is definitely an issue. Visibility is massively an issue. And also to say that when the visibility is there, it's often not thought of in its full complexity. So I just had this one slide that I can show you, which is basically, this is a quote from the Variety review of Top 5, which was a Chris Rock film that came out recently, which refers to Woody Allen. In the rest of the Variety review, it also refers to Richard Linklater, and it also refers to Birdman. And there is definitely, when you watch the film, you can see all of those references clearly. But when the distributor has marketed the film, you're not seeing those references at all. You're seeing something completely different. And I think that there is a lot of messaging, which is, I think, part of what you're saying is how can we intervene to get it to its meaningful audience, if we know that. And one of the ways that I think you can do that is by building networks. And that doesn't mean that you have to physically know people. Like, it's not about being in the right scene or anything like that. One of the great things about Twitter is that you can eavesdrop on people's conversations and borrow all of their knowledge. So I've got this slide of a fellow curator and programmer, Kate Taylor, who lots of you may know, who used to work at the ICO, now works at London Film Festival, has worked across the UK. She's always someone that I go to for quite idiosyncratic recommendations of film events, of new films. Through her followers, I have followed a lot of people. So I think it's about trying to think about who you want to get your message to, which is the audience, and thinking about who could help you. So I get what you're saying about Film 2015, but actually, is that really going to... That has a level of visibility, but what we're talking about is just getting people to really go and see it. It's not really validation. And I think what networks such as Scalarama, if you know about Scalarama, which is, so like very, again, that word that no one likes, but grassroots activism. There's a real new, like with some of the younger curators that are coming up, they're not even looking at mainstream media actually, because it's not relevant to them. So they're starting and making their own conversations. And after this session, actually, we'll be talking about a filmmaker called Cecile Amike, who has done exactly that, and she's created her own audience. So I think there is definitely a space that ICO has in championing work that we think is really great, and helping venues to develop audiences. But I'm also really excited by people that aren't even looking to us and are just doing it themselves, if I can say that, as a staff member of the ICO.
And also, I think it's the thing you were talking about too, David, which is around vision, and Karen spoke about it in the other panel, which is, I think when you are working... Okay, so when I was working for the BFI, so people will go, oh, who are you, what do you do? And you go, I'm Gaylene, I work for the BFI. And everyone goes, okay, I get that. Do you know what I mean? Like, your job title becomes your identity. If you don't have an because the BFI already has a vision, a mission, it's put out everywhere, everyone understands it. If you're doing something yourself, the work you have to do is on that. You have to work out, what do I really stand for? What does this space stand for? Why are we doing what we're doing? You have to do exactly the same kind of horrible word, but that branding process that organisations like the BFI, pay millions to do for yourself. And then that's what you communicate. So it's kind of what you're saying about the ICA. You communicated, we are about new, emerging film culture. And so people who like that go, oh, the ICA is my spot. So I think it's not trying to mirror what your Gemma's saying, what the Odeon Cinema is doing, because the Odeon Cinema is doing that. It's about what intervention are you, what wedge are you specifically trying to drive, and just keep driving that. And it does take time. It will take 4 years, but that's where the persistence comes, tenacity.
No. It's reward enough in itself. But it's certainly, not that we are advocating trend-driven programming, but there's certainly a concern, as this is evidenced by this event, There's certainly a concern within the sector to do diverse programmes, to get new audiences into your venues. So the film hubs do have pots of money, and I think it's worth talking to your film hub manager, coordinators, about any ideas that you might have. And yeah, so on a specific project basis, and taking advantage of the networking events that they also provide to sort of share experiences of how to deliver those things. But yeah, there's certainly no quota system. Maybe there should be.
There's no national or European or international organisation that funds this kind of work in the way that Europa Cinemas exists. You can resource programming, certain types of programming, by working in partnership with, for example, national cultural institutions, embassies and cultural departments of national embassies, but that's for a very specific kind of national cinema programming, so taking national cinemas from different parts of the world, that kind of work, but I don't think there's an overall organisation that funds.
I think that one of the things that we talked about when we were preparing the session was that every person's diversity in their area will be different. And that just because you might programme an African American film season or work with Iranian cinema, it's not necessarily that you are able to reach an Iranian audience, or an African American, well, a black audience, black British audience. But for me, that the fact that you're doing those things is diversity, because it's about showing other lives on screen. In terms of engaging with people that you're not engaging with, though, that I think what the thing about Twitter is kind of interesting, because you don't have to broadcast, but it is a really great research tool. And it's a really good research tool about things that are going on internationally, and conversations that people are having, collaborations that people are bringing about. So it's kind of it's a good place to just think about ideas that you might have. There's no simple answer to building your network. I think it takes time, but I don't think you should be defeated by the fact that you don't feel you have one yet, because it's kind of exploratory. This whole thing is quite exploratory. It's about being curious. One of the things that Gaylene has talked about before on some of our other courses is walking to work, and if you're not walking as I normally walk, which is like sending an email and doing whatever, you're actually looking around, and there's all these different people, hopefully, that maybe not a different ethnicity from you, but they're different people with different interests. And it's just about mapping that. Like, how do you map that? That would be my question. Do you feel like you know enough about the audience that you feel you aren't reaching? Are you sure you're not reaching an audience? What does that audience look like? And not necessarily being driven by difference either in terms of audience, more just being driven by variety of content, because that a lot of your, obviously your audience does like different things. So yeah, I think that's a really long way to say that.
Use Twitter.
Yeah.
I think also, again, I just keep coming back to this idea of vision, which is it's kind of the vision of your space, and each of your spaces vision will be different. So if, for example, the Cambridge Picture House's vision was, we want to become the hub for new technologies in cinema, blah, 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 right? Then you would then start networking and reaching out to those people. And in very short, that's just very simple, whether it's be social networks or on real IRL, in real life, where you just start talking, who are the people who in this town who are doing those things? So I'm trying to think of, there's a couple of initiatives, for example, that I can think of that have been very interesting with this. One was, it was someone who approached me to be, it was a major media centre, not in London actually, who got my name from somebody else and said, can I take you out for coffee? And whatever I want to chat to you, I said, sure. Never pass up a free coffee, so I said, okay. And I went along, and effectively he goes, look, I'm the board of this new organisation. At the moment, it's fantastic, but it's very monocultural, and I really don't want that to be the case. I think we're living in a world that's ever-changing, and I want to tap into that. I really need people like you on the board. Can you recommend other people on the board? I didn't know this guy from Adam, but he'd got just from literally talking to the few people that he knew, going out of his way to press flesh, put coffee in front of, buy cake, and show real curiosity and interest. The other space that I think is doing this very well is Birmingham Rep. Of course, Birmingham's very different to Cambridge in terms of demography. Is that the word? But the theatre isn't. So theatre was principally the white middle class audience of Birmingham would go to the theatre. And when Roxana Silbert took over, she was like, this can't be the case. So effectively what she's done very quickly is she's demanded that certain positions are more representative of the city that she lives in. So the education department, she's like, it's not okay that all our education department are white guys. Go out and find some brown people, please. We don't know any. Well, find them. I'll give you 48 hours. This is what we get, right? So off they go, and they talk to people, and they find the brightest people in that city, of which there are many. It's Birmingham. And sure enough, within 6 months, she's changed the demography of her institution internally, and the programming is therefore much more organic because those people know those people and they can bring them in. Then the audience changes, and it's been the biggest audience growth in Birmingham Rep history. And so she's like, it doesn't take long. All of this, it takes years. You just get the right people in. You only need to know 5 good people. So I would say, once you're aware of who you want to network with, find the 5 good people. Yeah. Take them for coffee.
Yeah, I mean, I'd reiterate that. I'd say it's always going to take some time to achieve, significant results. But you need to be open to working collaboratively. So rather than presenting the programme of world cinema that Cambridge Arts Picture House would do anyway, and offering it to these new audiences, you need to find people within the audiences that you're trying to the new audiences that you're trying to target, and work with them to, even at the stage of developing the programme,
yes,
and understanding how to work with them collaboratively.
Yes, and the great thing is with that, because like Sophia Wave here at the front, working with the Broadway, David Somerset at the BFI has a collaborative programming collective that he works with. It's that sense of opening up and saying, we don't know, can you come in as a curatorial partner? This is one thing I spoke to George about at the Tate, and I said, George, it would have been really good to find out who your curatorial partners were on the programmes you presented, because he had many, and I know some of them. So it's not like he has to come up with all of this on his own. From the very beginning, there's a blank sheet of paper, and you're like, come and help me fill this. And I would love, if there's one thing I'd love you all to take away, is to change the perception of curation as a godlike job that one person does, and see it as a collaborative practice, whoever that's with. And that's when the job becomes really dynamic and interesting. It's because that's how you learn stuff. So finding the people who can help you co-curate that programme is the thing.
And I think that's also reflected in kind of the conversation today as well. The fact that we kind of want your contributions as well, that this isn't, there isn't a beginner's guide actually, because it's exploratory work. And I think that that's really important thing to take away from today, I think. There isn't a catch-all guide, but there are ways of working and doing it successfully, different ones. Obviously there's lots of work that doesn't make it onto the FDA list that David was saying he'd liberated himself from at the ICA. So those are the new releases that might be upcoming. So if you want to look at new films, then that might be an interesting place to kind of realise that if you want to attract different audiences, you do have to look a bit deeper than new films, which obviously you found out already. But there are a variety of sort of online places where I would go if I wanted inspiration for different types of programming. There's really good content on the BFI. There's BFI Screen Online, which looks at British TV and film, which you may not have heard of or seen, on a variety of different formats that maybe your audience might not have, depending on their age, might not have come across before. They also have a really good online section, which is a news section, but they do a lot of listicles, which, you know, they're seen as the lowest common denominator of film criticism, but they are good, inspiration boards, and everything on BFI Online has to be available on some format, so at least then you know that you could search it out if you wanted to. Another list that I sometimes use that do really good lists, I think, are places like Flavorwire. And they'll do them thematically around, you know, forgotten female filmmakers. But there's definitely, in those lists, they won't be lists. I've seen lists where I've just seen films I've never heard of by women of colour filmmakers. There seems to be something like that knitted into all their lists, which I find quite fascinating. But I think also just like seeking out, like, does everyone know about Screening Film, the website? It's run by the Scalarama people, and it's basically a map of the UK, and it tells you what film events are going on that have been put together by pop-ups. And a lot of the pop-up stuff that's happening at the moment is very much based on underseen, neglected films. There's quite a lot of, trying to get back to analogue methods as well. So there's a lot of things on 35 and VHS. But there's also a lot of activism-led curating. So there are film clubs like Bechdel Test Fest, Real Film Club, who are all kind of looking at issues of identity, so different communities in the UK. And some of the programming that they're doing, you know that they found the film and they've screened it, so you know that it's available. You also know that an audience came to see it because they had to sell tickets. So that's also good inspiration for, you know, your one-off screenings as well. And then, again, search out those critics and programmers who have written those things and follow them and search out more work by them, because they are the people that have done a lot of the hard work for you. And that's kind of how I go about, you know, you obviously want to widen that network as far as possible. You don't just want to follow people that you like. But that's kind of how I get a lot of new information about things that I feel, you know, you could spend hours in the library, but I guess you can't if you're running a venue. So they're quite like a good curated section.
Thank you.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you need to, a bit like the previous answer actually from me, it sounds to me like you probably don't have time to do all of that research yourself, and you don't have a film background. So you might benefit massively from working in collaboration with groups of people in your local network, if you can find them, who do know about independent film and can also be kind of ambassadors for your potential audience for those screenings. So again, I'd say try and work collaboratively and open up your venue to a whole range of different curators.
And film and festivals, of course, which is always fun. You take a bit of time off, get a delegate pass, which you all can, right? And, you know, because the festivals are great for new films, of course, you know, to see what's coming out. But also it's amazing how many festival films don't get picked up, which are great, right?
Yeah.
And
so festival catalogues and festival websites, which list the whole programme, you can normally fairly quickly research whether the film's been picked up for distribution in the UK. And those things that don't get picked up, that might, you know, in their subject matter or the filmmaker or whatever, might inherently have some audience potential, are the things that you could look for.
This is Benedict Cumberbatch searching for diversity in the National Archives.
He's coming along later to tell us what you found.
So what was the first thing? Research materials. Well, I suppose we touched upon that a little bit in the previous answer, in that vast majority of cinemas will show films almost exclusively from that are being commercially released in the UK. So the vast majority of cinemas here, I would imagine, show films mostly from the FDA schedule. Is that right? Am I right in saying that?
Raise hands.
Yeah. Well, a few. Okay. So that's the first kind of resource for new films.
What's FDA stand for?
FDA is Film Distributors Association, and it's essentially the formal channel through which films are released in the UK. So they're all dated. The release dates are created through the FDA schedule, what's called the FDA schedule. Okay. But moving, I think, to get a really, I said this right at the beginning, to get a really interesting, rich, diverse program, you must look beyond that and start to open up parts of your program to content that you draw in from other sources, so not the FDA schedule. And it takes courage to do it, I think, in a regular cinema, because most of you are working on a week-to-week basis, looking at the box office figures at the end of each week, and I know the demands that are placed on most independent cinemas, even those that receive some subsidy. It's still a very demanding kind of environment to reach your box office targets, and obviously the easiest way to do that is to show commercially released films that have a certain amount of marketing and promotional support from the distributors. But I think it's very important to open out other parts of your program to free them up for films that you can source from other sources. You can take from other sources. These would include things like back catalogue, which Jemma talked about, older films from distributors that operate libraries, so Park Circus, BFI more so, I would say. Then also there's a kind of, again, something that Jemma hinted at, there's a sort of alternative distribution market, if you like, out there, which is through film clubs and pop-up cinemas, who often might bring in, and some cultural cinemas actually, who which might bring into the country films on a very temporary basis, or clear the rights to something directly with the filmmaker, which clear the rights to a film that hasn't been available in this country for a long time for public theatrical screenings. They might clear the rights for their screening, but actually it's to their advantage to clear the rights for a few screenings, and so to kind of get in on those networks, you start to access an alternative set of films. Festivals, films that aren't picked up by distributors for formal distribution can sometimes be, you can do the research through festival catalogues and then find the sales agents or directly access the films from the filmmakers, and deals can be done so that you can screen those films. Any other? There's a whole range of different sources anyway for accessing films which aren't in the formal distribution process.
Also, the other thing is, it's a rhetorical question, but you can feel free to answer it if you like, which is kind of, what is it about film? Why do you want to show films? And it goes back to the thing that Karen was saying earlier, which is, and she was quite resolute about it, saying, I only want to work with people who love film, who really love it, who really have something they want to do with it for a reason. And I think that always seems to me, before the kind of other bits, as a curator, the first thing is, why is it this medium that I really want to engage with? And I think once you excavate that a little bit, then in a way the rest follows. Because if it is about personal identity, then you're looking for films that reflect who you are, and maybe you wanting to show it to audiences like you, in which case that's your track. You know, you start looking at things, you find things online, you find out who else is out there, you connect with other film programmers who are doing things. If it's because what you're trying to do is you're interested in exploring the world through film, then you take another track. So there's as many avenues to answer your question in a way, but it starts with which direction you want to go in, I think.
Yeah. I think that way as well, you develop a kind of individual kind of curatorship and an individual style in your curatorial interests, which I think is always good. That's not to say that you should program films that you like, that only you like. In fact, the opposite in some ways. You should program films that you have a kind of personal interest in at some level.
And then your question around marketing as well is kind of similar to what David was just saying. There was like a list of these avenues that you can take, and each one will take a different level of resource. So, you know, if you're going directly to a filmmaker, then that's going to take probably a lot longer than if you're going to a distributor, because the filmmaker might be, you know, busy with something else. And I think each film that you show, each different experiment that you make will require you to market in a slightly different way, or it will require you to catch a different audience, a different age of audience possibly. So social media will not work for your older audiences. You'll need to get something physical probably. Some will be more hands-on than others, but it will really be led by the content and the journey that you then go on as a result. So the Josephine Decker project that Manisha was just talking about was a tour that the ICO delivered throughout August. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah. And it showcased the work of a female filmmaker called Josephine Decker, and it was her first 2 films, so she's quite a young filmmaker. She premiered her films at Berlin to great acclaim in certain circles, and but 2 of the programmers at the ICO myself and Selena had watched the films in Berlin and really loved them, and we kind of, you know, talked to Simon, who's in charge of our distribution, about the possibility of actually distributing them in the traditional way, or as traditional as the ICO distributes the film. And the kind of takeaway from that was there's a very, very small audience for these films, and it's going to be quite hard to engage them, and that's true. So we thought, what if we don't do the regular thing? What if we eventize each thing? What if we directly communicate to who we want to communicate with? And what if we do the thing which is kind of what you're not supposed to do, which is expose that core audience that you think are going to come to the films earlier on? So we actually sent the links to about 30 or 40 curators and interested artists beforehand, and got them to create work inspired by her work. And the inspiration for that really came from the films, because the filmmaker is a performance artist, and there was a lot of exploration in the film. So we kind of took that principle into the way that we curate the project. So in the back of my mind, thinking about the way that I do regular programming, I did have doubts of, well, actually I've just basically cannibalised the audience by doing that. They're not going, why would they come and watch this now? Why would they pay for a ticket? But people did, and it meant that we had foot soldiers talking about these great films and bringing their friends, and there's a collective gathered. It was interesting, this whole thing about the LA Rebellion at the Tate. We didn't talk about, or I didn't hear anyone talk about how that whole thing felt, because it was over 4 weeks, and a group, it was kind of like a fluxus happening, like loads of people met at the same events over and over again, talked about stuff that they were making, stuff that they felt. We started conversations that could actually go further, and more work that could be created. So I don't know the answer to your question, Manish, but I think that is something that is happening. I guess we're not doing it joined up. And I think things like Scalarama are drawing attention to it. But one thing that I would say about the Josephine Decker project is that I had no idea how much work it would be. It's really hard work doing that. It's hard work collaborating, but it's really rewarding. Like, it's the thing that I think I'm the most proud of working on, but it almost killed me doing that and the day job. So I totally understand, you know, that's kind of what I'd also like to say, is that it's not a magical thing, but it is really rewarding. And as I'm sure you've found from other collaborative work that you've done. But yeah, so that's that.
But you've helped me understand it after X amount of years, so thank you. Because I think what it is, which is what you did, interestingly, with that project, which is counterintuitive because you're giving the films away for free, is actually, it's not, when you're building new audiences, especially to come into a space that they're not used to, the work is only the catalyst. What's important is the space becomes a place that those people want to be. And so what often happens if you're in spaces like BFI or regional film centres that have a very set audience, that audience feels really comfortable being there. They can go there, they can see their friends, there's people like them over dinner, it's wonderful. But then to bring a new audience into that space who just just doesn't feel comfortable. This is why the events are important. You have to create, it's not just the work, you have to change that space to make it feel rich. And I'm glad Sophie's going to step in here because it's really important.
Yeah, so just to pick on the point Gaylene about space, one of the things that we did at the Broadway was the Reggae Symposium. So that was a day where I was asked to programme something to do with a diverse audience, and I selected reggae because obviously it's some sort of a universal, it's a leveller, it's a universal topic, it's globally known. But I really wanted to create a space at Broadway that an audience could come in, a new audience could come in and feel comfortable. So we had, we programmed films, but around the films we had live music, we had a symposium panel, we had barbecue outside. It was a place that people could come and meet and have a shared experience about the films they've just seen, and from that hopefully stimulate them to think, okay, this is okay, I've met new people, I'm comfortable here, let me see what else is going on that I would like to connect with again. So yeah.
I mean, it is hard work, isn't it? Because you're not just, it's different to just programming the film and going home to bed. You have all this extra stuff, but it's, and this is where the imagination, but this is the fun bit. It's work, but it's also, you start actually being a creative curator again. It's not just like I select the film, I press the button, I go home, I lie down. Suddenly you can go, God, I can commission artists, I could do this, I could do anything I want, which is why it's kind of really inspirational, both of these examples.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people think about film curation as a really linear thing, like it's just about the film, but I really pulled in the voluntary and community sector experience that I had and some of the contacts as well. We call them community connectors, so sort of working with a local DJ collective, working with a local African history group to kind of help to shape the day and reach out to their connections as well. So it's that multiplier effect.
One of the other things the other thing I've been thinking about, one around the work that you do before the film is released, because especially independent films that don't have big FDA marketing budgets, they build audiences. So doing the one-off screening for a small independent film that doesn't have much is less worthy than trying to find a way to continue some echo of that film, because the first screening you may get 20 people, but after the X amount of screening, Menelik Shabazz Looking for Love, I was in Birmingham last week, they had 200 people. The first screening was a quarter of that. And he goes, as the screenings are going on, word of mouth is going, so the audience is building. So one of the things with independent work to think about is, rather than a festival, so not the fan of the festival unless you have a lot of money. The regularity of screenings can be so much more valuable. So all of those movements that have grown, it's because they do monthly events, and they grow and they grow and they grow and they grow, and word of mouth goes. And so if there's a way in which you can think about it in that way, like the 4-year cycle, like the ICA, you know, like it will get rewards, but you put all your energy into a massive festival and then you get like 150 people and you're exhausted, you go, I'm never doing that again, right? So finding a way to do a little but often, sometimes better, I think.
And the whole idea of collaborative working is that, you know, you've collected, as you were saying, you've collected a group of people now, and you can kind of share that burnout between you in a way. You know, you've got that energy coming from lots of different angles, and I think that was, I'm now, because one of the things about the Josephine Decker project, which was interesting, was that we talked about it as you know, films about white girls for white girls, and as we were talking about that, I realised I wasn't part of that, and I loved those films, so how could I talk to other people about them? So we thought about visibility. So pretty much every panel that we put together had a woman of colour on there, and some panels were entirely women of colour, and not everyone even loved the films, but they talked about that, and so that meant that, I don't know, I thought that was really important to me in terms of, Gaylene, what you were saying about being on the outside looking in. I think that's also goes for curators that are working within institutions about things that they're uncomfortable with, that just, there's no right or wrong to that.
I mean, personally, I think all of it. I mean, I think I'm a big one for plurality, so I think you're absolutely right. I think, okay, the reason why, and I bet you're like going, oh, black film, that's all we're hearing about. But the reason why I think black film is an interesting case study in this country is because what happens with other national cinemas, so if you think about Indian cinema, South Asian cinema, Southeast Asian cinema, there's national cinemas. So what you'll often find is filmmakers, British Asian filmmakers working between the two, whether that in distribution, whether that's filmmakers, right? So hopping back and forth. And you're right, there's a very lively and successful popular Indian film market that is independent. They wouldn't be here. Why would they be here? We've got our audience thing. So I'm thinking, personally, I think everything and everything. Do you know what I mean? I don't think there should be an either or, like commercial cinema or subsidised cinema. I think there should be an equal breadth. I think the reason why black cinema, African diaspora cinema is particular, is because African cinema, apart from Nollywood, which is still fine, it's growing, but it's still very small in comparison. It's not national cinema in the same way. There is no home for it. So the filmmakers here in Britain and in the States have to make it there. They have to make it to those audiences. Do you see what I mean? There is now a kind of, people are making films here and taking it to mainly West Africa. That's beginning to happen, but there isn't the infrastructure there in the same way. So that's why this question particularly is the hot potato. Because quite frankly, if I was British Asian, I probably wouldn't be here. I'd be like, I'm just going down to the Odeon multiplex and hang out with my peeps. You know, so my point is that it depends, again, it's your personal passion. If you're a commercially minded person, do it commercially. Do you know what I mean? Make your own links with the Odeon, do it commercially. Find your own private backers, do it. If you are someone who's much more, as I am, interested in new emerging cinemas, things that are happening, then I probably need to agitate the subsidised sector a bit more, because they're the kind of films that I personally like. They won't come out of the commercial thing. So all of it and more, I would say. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I just also wanted to say, like, that about the British Asian question. When we were putting today's together, it was really, really, really hard, and it made me quite sad when I was looking at the FDA calendar, because probably this time last year we would have had quite a lot of new black British work that was really good. There was like this little flurry of really great films that were getting distribution that could have filled this date entirely. But this time last year and this time this year, there was no British Asian work. there was no British Asian authored work. And yes, we do have Bollywood in Cineworld and at the Odeon, but as a young British Asian person, that doesn't fulfil my needs at all. I just want to see someone like me on screen, and I want to see a director not just making shorts that you'll see in the shorts programme in London Calling, but seeing a feature. So there's a real, I think at the moment with black film, there's a trend. There's a real fascination with black film. There's a lot of activism around it, and which I feel very passionate about too. But I think one of the things that came out of the Josephine Decker project, I talked to a lot of people that talked about, trends aren't how you program or shouldn't drive your programming. It should be the people that you want to speak to.
But I think the thing is with those trends, the reason why this becomes exhausting, why I don't do it anymore, is because the politics end up driving the programming. And for those of us who just love film, you just want to watch a good film, you know what I mean? And if the only time my phone rings is if there is a exhibit B or a this or a that, and then people go, oh, can you just come and do something? It's like, it's going right back to what I was saying at the beginning. It's like passion. If we're in the world of culture, it's got to be driven by passion, though, or there's nothing, it burns out. This is kind of why we burn out. And so there needs to be, one of the things I'd say as a suggestion is that we need to have a really clear strategy when we're doing this work as to how we're going to navigate that reality, because that is the reality of it. It is a highly politicised environment that we're working in. So what is going to be the personal strategy to navigate that? And that's something that your brilliance, with your tenacity, you can do that. You can re-strategize a way to do this while looking after yourself, while making sure you don't go loopy in the process. Because it can, like I say, I have seen people lose their mind from doing this work, from being an activist for so long. So that can't be the price, that's too high a price. So what is the strategy? Is it short term, is it long term? If it's short term, if it's long term, how do you eke that out and not give yourself too much to do? Who do you build your passions to? Is it a global network that you need? So you're not just reliant on here, you've got your American, you've got your West African, do you know what I mean? Like, you need a strategy.
Yes.
And that's for everyone doing this work, actually. Create a race riot. Create a race riot in your town and then go, I can help.
Gaylene,
just pretend.
Recorded.
just keep your face out of the CCTV cameras. No, that's really facetious. I think, you know what? I don't know what you guys would think, but I would say do as someone like Jemma does, or lots of people in the room, is just do it. Find a way to start shaping your curatorial vision. The best place to do that is outside of an organisation. So putting on independent film screenings, getting a space, room, sticking up a sheet, do you know what I mean? Building your audience. Because I think I totally agree with Karen that the margins are where the creativity is. The organisations need you more than you need them in some ways. So getting your own following and shaping and doing something very interesting, then inviting them into that, into your world, is always a better way to have a conversation, rather than going in and going, can I have a bit of what you have? Do you want to come and have a bit of what I have? That's all. Then you can,
Well, you have to kind of build up your constituency to such an extent that it becomes irresistible as a proposition when you present it to a bigger institution, who you might present it to as a, when you're looking for another host venue for your event. And you want to get into that negotiation where they want you rather than where you're going, begging for some space in their program, actually. And the only way you can do that is by building up your following, whatever that is, whether it's your virtual followers or the actual numbers of people who come to your event. You can kind of couch it in whatever terms best suit you. I think that's the only way to do it, really. And that way as well, you build up. I suppose these days through social media, but also through traditional kind of press and media communications, you build up your reputation as a curator for a certain kind of for a certain area of film, and all those things added together make a very compelling case when you present it to an institution. The thing to remember as well is that a lot of the big institutions, although they seem quite closed off to external curators, external parties, they're actually not in many ways, because actually what you're doing, if you present yourself to them, actually what you're doing is you're giving them a kind of ready-made solution to a part of their program.
Yeah,
so
right.
It's very convenient, for lots of media centres, regional regional cinemas, independent cinemas, and some big national institutions, for them to work in partnership in that way. It's just very.
It's convenient.
Yeah, it's convenient, and for them, kind of resource light way of bringing in some very interesting programming.
I think that that's kind of, that's a question that I think about a lot as well. But I think they're two quite different things. So if you want your, kind of, David, what you were saying, if you want your film club to have more visibility, then that's one thing. But if you're talking about developing a career in the same vein as other people that are programming in institutions, that's quite a different thing. And there will be different things that you will have to tolerate in each scenario. So I think that in my own personal experience, my personal work is very different to the demands made on me in the work that I get paid for. And each one has taught me loads, but each one allows me different levels of freedom and creativity at a certain time. So I think that they're different things. I believe that they're different things, and not necessarily have to be in, once you get to the ideal job, and when you find it, let me know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the second thing, you have to kind of be careful what you wish for in a way, because you could end up in a scenario where you are the only one in an institution, and you find yourself in the scenario that Gaylene was describing this morning, which is can be rewarding but can also be really exhausting and have negative impact on your mental well-being.
And also because I spend a lot of time, my favourite coaching I do is with often, if I'm honest, young women who are brilliant and feel that they haven't yet fully grown into how big their brilliance is. And I think the reason why it's mainly women and often brown people I coach is because of the thing I spoke about at the beginning, which is if actually you've never witnessed anyone like you in that position, that big, you kind of can't believe it, right? And so you're constantly self-doubting whether you are able to do that. And one of the things that I think is one of the hardest things then, the thing I'm going to suggest you do, effectively, which is probably going to freak you out because it freaks out a lot of people when we speak about it, is you have to speak about the fact that this is who you are and what you do. You have to speak about your brilliance, which is why I nudged Jemma and I was like, I am Dora. You have to speak about it. You have to say, this is what I do, and I'm an expert at it, and I'm brilliant, and this is what I do, and it's brilliant for these reasons. And we know we're in a medium where we're surrounded by people who do that very well, right? And people go, I hate talking about myself. You're not talking about yourself to talk about yourself. You're talking about yourself to present the work that you do as valuable and important. So whichever one it is, whether it is the fact that you want to become a programmer within an institution or grow what you're doing, it means really valuing it and really speaking about it from that place of value. It means being persistent. It means sending emails and then sending another one a month later and saying, you really do have to have a meeting with me. It's really important what I'm doing here. It means saying that with conviction. It means going out and meeting people and speaking like that from that place. This is very un-British. I call this the Spike Lee thing, right? A kid who's at film school making this film, she's got to have it, and he just convinces everybody that this is going to be the best film ever. And it flipping is fantastic, and it changes film history as we know it. And I think part of that is, for those of us who are culturally neglected, I think ambition is a political act. To be really ambitious and say, I deserve to be doing that, is a political act. And so I'm a big fan of, the people who've worked with me will know this, at really pushing people to be very clear what it is they really, really, really want and articulate it. So that's what I would suggest you do. Really articulate it.
I wrote down a word when everyone was talking, which I think is quite relevant, which is disruption. And I think it's when you were talking about riots, probably. But, you know, because you're there and you have your networks and you have your idea of what you would like to see on the screen, and you have some sort of affinity to an audience that you want to attract. I think that's one thing that I would say is things don't change overnight, like the whole top-down thing won't change overnight, and at the ICO we're kind of acknowledging that by we have like training, a training course called the Fed Scheme, which is trying to get the new generation of curators in that are interested in these issues and have the support that they need to like really get to the top. But yeah, I think that kind of your presence is a big thing. I wouldn't minimise that just because, you know, obviously we've talked about being the only one isn't great always, but it's kind of in the same way that I've got, there's this quote up here which is 2 tweets that a curator sent about a film that the ICO distributed, which was it wasn't a diverse film necessarily, it was a regardless film, but he talked about how he only got 6 people in his screening, and he thought that was a victory, not a failure. And I think that just measuring success slightly differently and thinking about it slightly differently is a really good takeaway for whatever side of the fence you're on, actually. It's very disheartening not to see yourself on screen, but as Gaylene and lots of people have said, you find a way to find meaning in things. And also the other way, maybe you want to change your audience, but perhaps it won't happen overnight, but you want to do that, and that's like a really great thing. So yeah, that's kind of, I think measuring success is an interesting thing to think about, and having clear ideas of what that to you looks like.
Okay, I think that's a good point at which to end the session. So thanks to Gaylene and Jemma, and thanks to you all for your interest. Thanks.
And thanks to David.
Thank you.